My daughter called me on a Thursday evening to tell me she was bringing someone home for supper. She said his name was Adrian. She said he came from a good family. She said she really wanted me to like him. I told her I'd make the beef stew she used to ask for when the weather turned cold. The one her mother always said made the whole house smell like November, even in June. Lila laughed at that. She had her mother's laugh, light and sudden, gone before you had fully heard it. I hadn't heard enough of it since we lost her mother 5 years ago. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone still in my hand. The house was quiet in the particular way old houses get quiet. Not empty exactly, just full of the memory of other people moving through it. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, the one of Lila at 22 in front of the university library, hair blown across her face, smiling like she'd been let in on a joke nobody else knew. She was 30 now. For a long time, it had been just the two of us. I put the stew on low heat. I changed out of my work shirt into a clean blue button-down. I figured that was enough. Adrian arrived 35 minutes late. He pulled up in a silver Range Rover, the kind of car that seems designed to announce itself before the driver ever steps out. He sat in it for a full minute under the porch light before opening the door. I watched from the front window. I couldn't tell whether he was fixing his tie or studying his reflection or simply preparing himself to enter a house he had already decided he wouldn't respect. Lila came in first and wrapped her arms around my shoulders the way she had since she was little. Adrian followed behind her and let his eyes move over my living room in a slow, measured sweep. It was the look of a man evaluating a place he had no intention of understanding. He shook my hand. His grip was the kind men rehearse. Firm enough to suggest dominance, quick enough to suggest impatience. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Mercer," he said. The way he said it made pleasure sound theoretical. We sat down to supper. Adrian ate carefully, like someone trained never to dislike food out loud, but equally never to enjoy it too plainly. He asked what I did. I told him I was mostly retired now, though I still handled a few real estate matters and kept my hand in property work. He nodded in a way that suggested he had arranged me in his mind already. He said he was a managing director at Hawthorne Crest Partners. He gave the title a certain weight, the kind men use when they want a room to pause for them. I told him that sounded like serious work. He said that it was. Lila watched us through the meal with that expression daughters get when they are hoping and bracing at the same time. I tried. I asked questions. Adrian answered nearly all of them by circling back to Adrian. By the end of supper, I knew his compensation structure, his firm's current acquisition strategy, his opinions on urban infill markets in Austin, Nashville, and Atlanta, and the fact that he had gone to Columbia Business School, which he managed to mention 4 times in under 90 minutes. What I did not know was anything meaningful about how he loved my daughter. After he left, Lila helped me bring the dishes into the kitchen. She asked me what I thought. I told her he seemed very sure of himself. She smiled at that, the way daughters smile when they have understood exactly what their father chose not to say. "He takes a little getting used to," she said. "I'm sure he does," I told her. I rinsed the bowls and thought about the way he had looked at my house. Then I thought about the way he had barely looked at Lila once while describing his own career. I let it go. She was happy. That counted for a great deal. Over the next few months, Lila brought Adrian by often enough that I learned his rhythms. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious ways. He was the more polished kind of dismissive, the sort that never hands you anything clear enough to object to. He talked over me at supper without technically interrupting. He smiled at my opinions the way people smile at old postcards. He called me "Sir" every single time, which ought to have sounded respectful and never did. He proposed to Lila in October at a rooftop restaurant on the riverfront, one of those places with candlelight, expensive glassware, and menus that make you feel they are charging for atmosphere first and food second. She called me on the drive home, crying in the good way, breathless, laughing, talking too fast. I sat on the back steps with the cold settling into the yard and listened to her describe the ring, the view, what he had said, how surprised she had been though she had half expected it all month. And I felt two things at once, pure joy for her, and something quieter beneath it, something I could not yet name. 3 weeks later, Adrian's mother called me. Her name was Evelyn Sloan. She introduced herself as Evelyn, not Mrs. Sloan, and waited just long enough for me to decide whether I would do the same. I did. She seemed pleased by the choice. She told me she was organizing the engagement celebration. She said she wanted it to be substantial, 250 guests, the Marlowe Conservatory downtown, formal dinner service, open bar, chamber trio, mid-March. Then she asked whether that date worked for me. I said it sounded lovely. I asked whether there was a budget I should know about since I would be glad to contribute. There was a pause on the line. Some pauses have a texture to them. That one did. She said, "That's very thoughtful. But please, there's no need. We'll take care of everything. We simply want you with us." I understood what that meant. I thanked her and said I looked forward to it. Lila called that evening, and I could hear the embarrassment in her before she said a word. She said her future mother-in-law had strong preferences about events. I told her I had gathered as much. "She isn't trying to be unkind, Dad," Lila said. "She just comes from a different kind of world." I told her I understood, and I did. I only wished, quietly to myself, that Lila sounded more certain of the world she was stepping into. In January, Adrian came by the house alone. Lila was working a Saturday shift at the medical center. She's an oncology nurse, a fact Adrian mentioned to people the way a man mentions an impressive hobby someone else has, rather than the calling around which an entire life is built. He knocked around 1 in the afternoon, dressed as if he had stopped by on his way from somewhere better. He sat at my kitchen table, declined coffee, then accepted it, then left it untouched. He had the look of a man who had practiced a conversation and resented having to perform it. He said he wanted to talk about the future. His future with Lila. He said they were considering a townhouse in Crescent Park, one of the new developments near the old rail district, all roof decks and coated entry systems and narrow front gardens, pretending not to be decorative. Prices started around $900,000. He said once they were settled and comfortable, he hoped Lila would leave the hospital. He said the hours were difficult. He traveled often. It would be easier if she were home, at least once they started a family. I looked at him across my own kitchen table and thought about my daughter who had known she wanted to be a nurse before she was 10. I thought about the night she had called me after her first pediatric oncology rotation, crying not from fear, but from the terrible privilege of loving people when they are that fragile. I thought about the little linen notebook she kept on her nightstand, where she wrote down the initials of the patients who got to go home. I said, "Has Lila told you that she wants that?" He said, "I'm going to speak with her about it. I just wanted to give you a heads up since I know how close you two are. It may take her some time to adjust." I held my coffee cup and said, "Adrian, my daughter's work matters to her in a way you should probably understand before you ask her to give it up." He smiled. It wasn't a smile that reached anywhere important. "With respect, sir," he said, "people change once they start building a family. I've seen it many times. Her priorities will shift." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Be careful with that conversation." He took one sip from the coffee he hadn't wanted, stood, thanked me for my time as though I were a calendar appointment, and left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long while after that. I did not call Lila. It was not my conversation to have. But I made a note somewhere in the back of my mind. Not a conclusion, just a note that I was paying attention. March came. The engagement party was on a Friday, which meant Lila spent Thursday night at Evelyn Sloan's house on the north end of the city, surrounded by bridesmaids, stylists, opinions, and whatever traditions that family preferred to label as warmth. I drove downtown alone in my truck. It's a 2011 Chevrolet Silverado, dark blue, with some rust beginning along the rear wheel arch and a dent above the tailgate that I keep meaning to fix and never do. I parked it in a public garage 4 blocks from the Marlowe Conservatory because the valet line was spilling into the street and I had no interest in paying to wait. I walked to the venue in my good suit, deep charcoal, altered 2 years ago after I lost some weight following Nora's death. It is a good suit. It was made by a tailor in Richmond who has been doing my suits for 25 years. Nobody at the Marlowe would have known that by looking at it. They would have seen a man in his 60s in a cut slightly older than the room preferred and drawn their conclusions accordingly. The Marlowe Conservatory is a handsome building, built in 1928. Stone exterior, original bronze entrance doors, a grand hall on the second floor with 19-foot ceilings, restored plaster rosettes, and walnut paneling that catches light in a way modern buildings never seem able to manage. I have always loved that room. I have spent a great deal of time in it over the years, though not in any way Adrian would have guessed. I checked in at the reception table and found my place card. Table 16. The Sloan family was at table 1 near the dais. Lila was seated there too, between Adrian and Evelyn. She looked up when I entered and gave me a small wave and a look that said 2 things at once. I'm all right, and please be all right too. I smiled back and meant it. At table 16, I sat beside a couple from Buckhead who were old friends of Evelyn's. The woman asked how I knew the family. Lila is my daughter, I said. She blinked once, then smiled warmly enough and introduced her husband. We had an easy enough conversation after that about Lila, whom they had met once at a charity luncheon and found delightful. That part was simple. Lila is always delightful. Dinner was served. It was very good food, beautifully plated, the kind of meal designed to signal importance at least as much as satisfy hunger. I ate it and appreciated it for what it was. Adrian worked the room between courses. I'll give him that. He was excellent with a crowd. He knew names, remembered details, laughed on cue, touched elbows and shoulders with the confidence of a man who had been assured his entire life that rooms would make space for him. He came to table 16 and greeted the Buckhead couple as though resuming a conversation already underway. Then he turned to me. Sir, he said, glad you made it. Wouldn't have missed it, I said. You find parking all right? He asked. Downtown can be a little tricky if you're not used to it. Something in the softness of it, the gentle management of a problem I did not have, made the couple glance at each other very briefly. It was nothing. It was everything. I managed just fine, I said. Thank you. He patted my shoulder once and moved to the next table. The trouble began after the toasts. Evelyn had arranged a photo gallery in the upstairs promenade, a long run of framed pictures showing Adrian from childhood onward, threaded together with photographs of Lila, and then the 2 of them as a couple. It was elegantly done. I stood there for a while looking at pictures of my daughter I hadn't seen before. Lila in a vineyard in Oregon. Lila on a sailboat somewhere warm enough for white linen and bare shoulders. Lila in the snow outside what looked like a lodge in Vermont. She looked happy in every one of them. I tried to hold on to that. A man stepped up beside me, mid-50s, broader through the chest than Adrian's side of the family generally ran, gray at the temples, a glass in his hand he wasn't really drinking from. He introduced himself as Daniel, Adrian's uncle, his father's younger brother. We shook hands. He asked whether I was a family friend. I told him Lila was my daughter. Something shifted across his face. Not unkind, just revised. She's a remarkable woman, he said. We're all very fond of her. I'm glad to hear it, I told him. We stood there another moment looking at the photographs. Then he said quietly enough that it belonged only to the 2 of us. Adrian is luckier than he understands. I looked at him and nodded. There was something honest in that exchange, and I was grateful for it. a small true thing in a room built largely out of performance. I had just turned back toward the ballroom when Adrian intercepted me. He was with two men I hadn't met, both his age, both carrying themselves in that polished glass office way, all cufflinks and low-voiced certainty. "This is Ethan," Adrian said, "and this is Ross." We shook hands. Then Adrian smiled and said, "This is Lila's father. He drove in tonight in a beat-up Silverado from 2011. He said it lightly, almost affectionately, but turned his head toward his friends as he did. One of them laughed. The other looked embarrassed. I stopped walking. Adrian, loosening under the champagne and the safety of his own audience, kept going. "I'm serious," he said. "Blue Chevy, rust starting near the back, parked 4 blocks over apparently. Valet mentioned it." He shook his head with fond amusement, as if I were a lovable inconvenience in a story about himself. "I keep telling Lila we've got to get him into something safer, but he won't hear of it. Stubborn, old school, right, sir?" He looked at me when he said that last part, smiling as though we were sharing the joke. "I like my truck," I said. He laughed. His friends laughed with him, though less confidently now. "I know you do," he said. Then he turned back to them as if I had already been dismissed from the frame. "Lila says he hardly lets anyone into the house," he said. "Lives out in Brook Hollow in that place he's had forever. Probably sitting on, 300 grand in the market if he's lucky, and the house maybe another 450, but he's comfortable. Simple life. Simple needs." I stood there. He realized I was still there about a second too late. His face changed in a quick and complicated way. "Sir, I just meant—" "I know what you meant, Adrian," I said. I walked back into the ballroom. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little. I sat down at table 16 and looked up at the ceiling, at the plaster medallions, at the sconces along the wall, original bronze, carefully rewired in 1994 and again in 2021. At the hickory floor, lifted and relaid in 2016 after the stormwater failure that had flooded the lower level and exposed a structural weakness along the western support line. I knew the room the way you know a place you have spent time preserving. I had purchased the Marlowe Conservatory in 2008 when it was 6 months from auction, and most of the city had already decided it would be easier to let it become offices or condominiums or nothing at all. I bought it because buildings like that are not made anymore, and because I could. The restoration had taken 17 months. I had stood in that very room in boots, dust, hard hat, rolled sleeves, and the same kind of work clothes Adrian had apparently translated into limitation. I said none of that. Not then. Lila came to my table after dessert, and before the music picked up. She sat in the empty chair beside me, took my hand, and leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment, the way she used to when she was very small and tired enough to forget she was trying to grow up. "You doing all right?" she asked. "I was having a perfectly decent evening," I said. I looked around the room. "The hall looks beautiful tonight." She exhaled. "Adrian's had too much champagne," she said. "He gets—" She stopped there. Then she said, "He really does care about you. He's just not always very good at showing it." I put my hand over hers. "I know you love him," I said. She looked up at me. "I do." "Then tell me one thing," I said. "Not how he is in rooms like this. Not with people watching, when it's just the two of you. Does he make you feel the way you deserve to feel?" She was quiet. Longer than I liked. Then she said, "He makes me feel like life is under control, like somebody knows what the next 5 years are supposed to be." I looked at my daughter. I thought about the little notebook by her bed. I thought about the names and initials and dates inside it. And I said, "That's not the same thing, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand. She did not answer. A moment later, she went back to table 1, and I watched her lean toward Adrian to say something while he put an arm around her without taking his eyes off the conversation he was already in. What happened next was not something I planned. I want to be clear about that. I did not send a message. I did not make a call. I simply existed in a room where I had a long history, and history has a way of making itself known when people least want it to. The evening coordinator was a woman named Sandra Bell. She had managed private events at the Marlowe for 9 years. She was excellent at her work, invisible when she needed to be, present the moment anything mattered. I had met Sandra many times over the years, though never in the context of this evening. She had no reason to expect me there. I had no reason to expect to see her. But grand halls are not as large as they look once you know their angles. At about 9:20, near the end of the photo promenade, Sandra came through a service door carrying a tablet and stopped when she saw me. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I had no idea you were here tonight." I smiled. "Neither did I, Sandra." "Is everything to your liking?" she asked. "If there's anything the team can do—" Daniel, Adrian's uncle, was standing maybe 8 feet away, pretending to look at the photographs again. Sandra, professional and entirely innocent of the drama opening under her feet, continued. "Oh, and before I forget," she said, "the architects from Ward and Bell sent over those revised balcony plans for your review. They mentioned you might have time Tuesday afternoon. If we could get 15 minutes on your calendar, we'd be grateful." "Tuesday works," I said. "Perfect," she said. "And truly, it's lovely to have you here. The entire staff is proud of how tonight came together in your building." She moved on. I became aware, slowly, that Daniel was looking at me with the same expression he had worn earlier, only now the adjustment being made was much larger. "You own this place," he said. It wasn't really a question. "I do," I said. He looked out over the hall his nephew had chosen for his engagement celebration. The hall where, less than an hour earlier, Adrian had joked to his colleagues about my truck and my small life. Daniel set his glass down on a side table. "Does Adrian know?" he asked. "I don't believe so. Does Lila?" "Not the particulars. She knows I've been in property work a long time." He looked at me for another moment, and then said the most honest sentence spoken all evening. "My nephew is a fool." "He's young," I said. Daniel gave me a look. "He's 33. I allowed that. I don't know exactly how the information moved from one part of the room to another. Daniel was not a malicious man. I do not think he wanted to set anything on fire. But information in a crowded room has its own weather, and by 9:50, I could feel something shifting around me. Adrian's father, Thomas, quiet all evening to the point of near erasure, came to find me near the bar and shook my hand very differently than he had earlier. More carefully. More like a man who had realized he had misfiled something important. He asked whether we might sit down privately sometime the following week. I said I thought that could be arranged. Evelyn Sloane found me not long after. She was composed as she had been all night. I suspect she had been composed for so long it had become indistinguishable from breathing, but there was caution in her face now that had not been there before. "Jonathan," she said, "I didn't realize." She stopped. Then she corrected herself into something more stable. "I hope the evening has been pleasant." "The hall looks beautiful," I said. "You and your people did a wonderful job." "Yes," she said. "Thank you." And then she moved away. I was at coat check when Adrian caught up with me. He was alone. His tie was loosened, his collar open, his earlier smoothness gone. He looked like a man who had just discovered that the world contained information he had failed to request. "Sir," he said, "could I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course." We stepped aside near the walnut paneling in the front corridor, original woodwork from 1928 that I had paid to have restored by a conservator from Boston, because only a handful of people still knew how to do the work properly. Adrian placed his hand against it absently, the way people touch beautiful things they neither recognize nor deserve. I just wanted to say, he began. Some things I said earlier didn't come out the way. He stopped. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I know, I said. He swallowed. I didn't know about the conservatory, about any of it. He gestured vaguely, by which I understood him to mean the building, the restoration, the money, the life he had so confidently reduced. I understand, I said. He looked at me and said, I feel like an idiot. Adrian, I said. He looked up. You do not owe me an apology because you found out I own this building. If there is an apology, it has nothing to do with what I own. He stood very still. You told two men tonight that my life was small, I said. You didn't say it because you thought you were being cruel. That part I believe. But you said it because you had already decided what kind of man I was without learning anything worth knowing. And it wasn't the first time. He opened his mouth. Closed it. I went on. What concerns me isn't my pride. It's my daughter. His face shifted then, finally, away from embarrassment and toward attention. She told me tonight that you make her feel like life is under control, I said. Like somebody has a plan. She said it as though that should be enough. I don't think it is. He said nothing. You are going to marry my daughter, I said. She is not an accessory to your plan. She is not a problem to optimize. She has worked 12-hour shifts for years to do work she was meant to do, and she is very good at it. Whatever conversation you plan to have with her about leaving the hospital, I suggest you think very carefully before you have it. He was silent for so long I could hear the valet traffic beyond the bronze doors and the city moving through a mild spring night outside. At last he said, in a voice very different from the one he had used all evening, She told you about that? She didn't need to. Another pause. Then quietly, I thought it would make things easier. I believe that, I said. But easier for you is not the same as better for her. He looked down at the floor, then back at me. Do you think she knows I love her? He asked. I mean, really knows it? There he was. For the first time all evening. Maybe for the first time since I'd met him. Under the polish and the title and the practiced handshake there was, at least in that moment, a man frightened by the possibility that he had built a whole life around being impressive and forgotten to be known. I think that's a question you should ask her, I said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, with more care than before, I'm sorry for what I said tonight, and for the other times. I appreciate that, I told him. I put on my coat. He held the door. I walked the 4 blocks to my truck in the March air. The city smelled the way cities do when winter has finally begun to loosen its grip. Damp pavement, faint exhaust, something green trying to return beneath stone. I unlocked the truck and sat there for a moment without starting it. The rearview mirror caught the streetlight in a way that showed every small imperfection in the windshield. My life, in the broad outlines, is this. I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina, the oldest of 3. My father laid brick. My mother worked reception at a dentist's office until I was 14 and at a hardware wholesaler after that. We were not poor exactly, but we were a family in which money had to be handled respectfully, not discussed carelessly. I bought my first property when I was 27, a tired duplex outside Columbia that needed more patience than money and both kinds of labor. I lived in one unit and rented the other. Then I did it again. Then again. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a side project and became the thing I knew how to do better than anything else. The Marlowe Conservatory was the 38th property my firm acquired. There were others after it. I never talked about any of it much. My father used to say that people who announce their value are usually trying to convince themselves first. I drove the truck I liked. I lived in the house where my wife and daughter had made a life with me. I wore boots when I worked and a good suit when the evening required it. I started the engine. I was halfway home when Lila called. Dad. Hey, sweetheart. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, Why didn't you ever tell me? Tell you what? She laughed a little. Her mother's laugh again. Dad, Daniel told basically the entire Sloan family over coffee and dessert. Evelyn nearly dropped her glass. Adrian disappeared for 20 minutes. I'm sorry if it disrupted the evening. Are you? A little. She laughed again. Then she got quiet. You know what's strange? She said. I knew something was wrong. I kept telling myself Adrian just needed time with you, but I knew. I just didn't want to look directly at it because... She stopped. I waited. Because if I looked at it directly, she said, I might have had to admit I wasn't as happy as I kept saying I was. I kept my eyes on the road. Then she said, We talked after you left. Really talked. I don't know what happens next, but he was different. Not polished, not presenting. Just there. Good, I said. Did you do that? She asked. Did you somehow orchestrate all of this? I attended your engagement party and ran into Sandra Bell. She was quiet for a beat. Then she said, That is the most answer you could possibly have given. Drive safely tonight, I told her. All right. Then, after a second, Dad? Yeah? The notebook on my nightstand. Did you know about it? Your mother told me years ago. She was silent again. When she spoke, her voice was soft in the way that reminded me the child she had once been was still somewhere inside the woman. I wrote a name in it last week, she said. A woman in her 60s, scared out of her mind. She kept apologizing for being afraid. She got discharged 2 days later. I smiled to myself in the dark. That's the whole point of it, I said. She exhaled. I know. I drove through streets I had known for 3 decades, past buildings whose histories I knew the way some men know baseball statistics, past the old Franklin warehouse we converted into mixed-income apartments in 2011, past the bookstore on Mercer Street, housed in a building I bought in 1999 and have leased at the same forgiving rate ever since because the owner keeps good hours, knows customers by name, and has been there long enough to belong. I thought about my father. I thought about my wife. I thought about what I wanted to say to Lila and found it the way I always had with her, by not forcing it. I said, The only part of your life that matters is the part that feels true when the room is empty. She didn't answer right away. Then she said very quietly, I know, Dad. When I reached home, the porch light was on. I had left it on, the same way I always did whenever I went out after dark. A habit from years of returning to a house where someone else was already inside waiting. Some habits are worth keeping. I went in, set a kettle on, and sat at the kitchen table in my suit while the old house settled around me. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. Lila, hair across her face, smiling as if she had gotten away with something. And I thought, maybe she had. 6 months later, I sat in the front pew at her wedding. Adrian cried when he saw her walk down the aisle. Real tears. Not the polished kind people borrow for a moment because the room expects them. The involuntary kind. The kind that arrive before pride can stop them. He touched his knuckle to the corner of his eye like a man mildly embarrassed by being human. Lila reached him. He took both her hands in his and held them as if he understood, finally, that love is not leverage and not architecture and not a strategy for keeping life orderly. It is simply the thing you are afraid to mishandle because you know exactly what it would cost. I thought of what she had said to me that night in March. He makes me feel like life is under control. It wasn't enough, I had thought. Then I watched him look at her. Maybe it was the beginning of enough. The chapel was small and old, and exactly the one she had chosen for herself. Afternoon light came through the stained glass in long blue and amber bands across the aisle. Somewhere during the vows, Daniel caught my eye from across the room and gave me a slight nod, the kind exchanged by men who had once stood together inside an honest moment and remembered it. I nodded back. My daughter married him on a Saturday in September. There were 108 guests, a modest reception in a garden hall outside the city, the kind of place where you can hear conversation over the music and where nobody needs to perform wealth because joy is already doing enough work on its own. There was no grand promenade, no distant table 16, no corridor made for echoes. I danced with Lila to the song she had asked for since she was 11, the one Nora and I had danced to at our own wedding. For years after Nora died, I couldn't bear to hear it. That evening, I discovered I could. Lila put her head against my shoulder and said, "Are you happy, Dad?" I considered the question carefully, the way important questions deserve. I thought about Nora, who would have cried all through the ceremony and denied it immediately after. I thought about the old house that still held the shape of her inside it. I thought about the first duplex in Columbia and the years that came after. I thought about Sandra Bell and impeccable timing. I thought about my daughter's notebook. I thought about a frightened woman who got to go home. Then I said, "Yes, sweetheart." And this time there was nothing beneath it that needed another name. The song played on.